All right. Hello, everyone. We are live. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ in the fellowship and the communion of the Holy Spirit. Welcome to the stream. It's a pleasure to have all of you wherever you are watching from. And the weekend is upon me already, and
Mm.
I think it's approaching for many of you for wherever you are. And as the title of the stream and the discussion has, as
Mm.
we know, we're talking about biblical manuscript tradition today. And joined with us today is Pastor Green with us. Pastor Green, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for reaching out. I know it's been a few months to actually get this to go, but we're here. We're finally here, so it's good.
Yes, yes. And, thank you so much also for responding. And we became connected, and you were gracious enough to have this time with us. I must say that I'm impressed, and I, of course, thank God for the resources and the ability and the gift, I would say, that He has given to you to process so much. This is such a difficult subject that
Mm-hmm.
many wouldn't want to actually dive into. I'm really excited to wait to hear more from you. So thank you for accepting this invitation.
Yeah, thanks
Um,
for inviting me.
just off for the introduction, perhaps you can introduce yourself. Let us know a bit of yourself before we dive into the discussion.
Yeah, sure thing. So, Pastor Dwayne, you can just call me Pastor Dwayne. That's fine. I pastor a small church up in Ontario. It's the Pentecostal Country Church. We have about 20 or 30 congregants, and I've been pastoring there for about 5 years. However, you're not here to hear about my pastorate. What you're here to hear about is biblical manuscripts. And so that's been a very long, deep dive for me. So basically, since I was a Christian, I began reading the King James Version. Right, I was kind of reared up in the faith in a fundamentalist Baptist church, and they get a bad rap, but they're not really as bad as we often hear. There's a few bad eggs out there, but now obviously I'm not a fundamentalist Baptist. Now I'm
Hmm.
a Pentecostal minister, but it was at the Baptist church that I really gained a love for the Word of God,
Hmm.
and that love for the Word of God had directed me, perhaps the Holy Spirit has directed me into learning the language and diving into these questions. And
Mm.
I remember one of the big things that I remember was a friend of mine had an NIV Bible, and I had a New King James version, and there's some differences there, and
Right.
we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. But she was reading a passage, or
Hmm.
sorry, I was reading a passage that she did not have in her Bible at all. Like it was just the
Wow.
verse number was not even there. And I remember thinking, like, wow, that is crazy. Why is there Bible verses missing from her Bible? And so that's I don't know if that's what started it, but that definitely impacted the
Mm.
direction that I went when I was taught when I began looking at all of this stuff. So yeah, so ultimately, I settled down on the New King James Version. The reason why is because it's text based as Texas Receptus. Now, I'm not a Texas Receptus guy, right? And I'm not a King
Right.
James Version onlyist, but I also don't necessarily go along with the scholarly consensus on a number of issues in regards to text criticism, biblical manuscripts. So I'm kind of in this weird spot that really nobody is happy with. But we
I
can
can
talk a
I
little
can
bit about. Yeah,
I
go
can
ahead.
see that because when I stumbled upon your channel, um, I really came about it was actually through a recommendation through
Mm,
another channel. Is
mm.
actually the channel's name is actually Word on Ward.
Oh, yeah,
There's
Mark.
another. Yeah, exactly. So
Yep.
yeah, that's the one. I sorry. And when I was watching one of his videos, and then your channel came up, and then I went to look for all the videos. Wow, this is. I mean, the coverage itself is extensive, and you're talking to
Mhm.
the scholars, preeminent scholars, and you're addressing all these issues. I would say, and what surprised me is that when I got to know that you're a pastor, like, wow. I mean, it's quite. First of all, it's rare, and
Mm.
second of all, there's so much depth that has to be dived into, right?
Oh, for
And
sure.
but what I liked about in the way that you're presenting this information, that I think we will obviously get into that first section of our discussion, is that the importance of it is that you present it in a balanced way, uh, because I've seen people advocate for certain positions,
Mm.
but they do it in a very polemical way, but you are doing an educating perspective, and I that's what really caught my attention, and to continue to learn from what you are saying. I myself do not have a particular position on which
Hmm.
manuscript position, that I hold to,
Well, maybe
but
we'll
I
change that
sometimes,
tonight.
yeah, exactly. So I do see. I've watched all your interactions with this. For example, Dr. Maurice Robinson.
Mm.
Um, you know, so I think later his name will come up, obviously, and also your discussions with him. What I'm trying to say is that there is a sense that the importance of what you are doing has to be communicated to a lot of Christians, because as you mentioned very early on in during your introduction, when it comes to certain groups advocating and dismissing or rejecting certain Bible translations, but without really telling the context behind it, right? So
Hmm.
I myself, got into this study as well. I mean, not extensive as you are, but really studying textual criticism really opened my eye, and the love for the scriptures, especially the miracle of the transmission of the text itself.
Hmm.
And I think because the world that I come from, English is not the primary language, so the easiest translations was NIV, right?
Mm.
And then over time, when the omissions of these verses came upon, that's how we are introduced to this world. So I want to gather from you, right? You obviously talked about the sort of inspiration that got you into it.
Hmm.
But since you're a minister, you shepherd a church, but what's really behind the motivation of starting the channel? Perhaps this is where the essence of this whole motivation
Sure.
about starting the channel, and particularly the subject of textual criticism, because one thing we are studying in the ancient texts, but this is in depth. This is what I think perhaps you can communicate. This is that textual criticism is such a in depth study
Sure.
subject. So how and what motivated you to get into this?
Okay, yeah. So the YouTube channel, so it's textual discussions with Dwayne Green,
Right.
and it wasn't initially a text critical channel. It was just that I'm learning Koine Greek, and I'm just gonna
Mm,
post videos on here of me attempting to learn it so that I can communicate with some people. So if you go back to my very first videos, I'm just gonna leave them up there because they're really bad quality. But you can go and watch them. Uh, and this is me attempting to speak in Elinika in Greek. As I was
right.
learning it, and there was a gentleman on a web forum. So back in the days, PHPBB, the bulletin boards,
Right.
the old school. We're like late '90s, early 2000s. I would go on there and we would try to speak to each other in Koine Greek, and then it kind of morphed into attempting to
Wow.
do it in YouTube. And so you can go on my early channels and see where I'm attempting to speak and talk about Kinari Omu, my dog, and things like that. Um, but that's initially how the channel was born. I want to learn Greek, and I wanted to post some of the stuff that I've been doing. And then, excuse me. And then what happened after that is, as I was like reading and gaining things, I just started posting some random stuff. I did a couple Bible reviews and stuff, and then just kind of settled into textual criticism, because that was kind of the direction the channel was going, sort of on its own. It was just kind of led in that way, and it's
Mm,
just something that naturally I find interesting. To pursue and to look at. It's like this thing, and you're looking at all these ancient things, and you're trying to puzzle this thing together, and I just found it interesting, and so the channel just niched itself down into the discussion of New Testament textual criticism. Uh,
right.
and then you can see a part of my journey where I was kind of wiffle waffling between a TR position and a Byzantine text position, and
Mhm,
finally came down on the Byzantine side. And again, it's not much different from the text receptus. So we're not
mm,
talking about text generally,
mm,
but method.
Right.
So yeah, and then I just kind of kept going from there. I sent out some requests to some scholars to say, hey, you want to come talk about this stuff? And it was like
Right.
fire and forget, right? And then I was getting emails back saying, yeah, I'd love to come on and talk about. I want to, yeah, that'd be great. And so that's how the channel grew, and that's kind of how I got into it.
Lovely, lovely. I
Yeah.
mean, that's essentially what I intend to do through this discussion, is not to reinvent the wheel, basically,
Hmm.
right? Making this content. My intention is that the focus of the channel is historical theology, and part of it is obviously manuscript tradition, something that's being passed down from generation to generation. And I was impressed, and obviously people like you somewhat are the gap in between the lay and also the lay people and the scholars.
Hmm.
First of all, you're a pastor, so you can actually speak to the people. So
Yeah,
the
yeah,
ideas are definitely being communicated, from the, compared to someone in between, compared to the high tiered people, the vocabularies and so forth.
yeah.
um so thank you for that. So briefly, just moving from that, is that I think people are aware, it's like, okay, textual criticism, I understand, Pastor Green, SBM, you're talking about manuscript tradition. So I guess, for a starters, defining terms, or giving them the foundations, what do we mean by manuscript tradition, and what do we mean by textual criticism?
Yeah, so we'll start with textual criticism because that
Okay.
kind of leads into manuscript traditions.
Right.
So text criticism, I'm at this point I'm just parroting just about everybody who talks about text criticism, right? Because
Yes.
oftentimes people think it's about criticizing the Bible and what it says.
I
There's
wanted to say that. Yeah.
yeah, there's higher and there's lower criticism, and higher criticism has to do with like checking the historical things, and maybe these things don't actually mean what they say and stuff. We generally don't do higher criticism as Christians. It's not our. But lower criticism refers to looking at the Greek manuscripts and trying to determine which reading is actually written by the author of the given book.
Mm.
So for those who may not be aware, I think just about everyone is, but to those who may not be aware, they didn't have computers when
Mm, mm,
Paul
mm.
and Peter and James, when they wrote their books, they didn't have computers. They didn't have control copy and control paste, right?
Yes.
So they literally wrote it out by hand. And if you've tried to write anything out by hand, you know how that goes. You are going to make mistakes. I
Mm.
tried writing something out by hand a little while ago, and it was okay, but I made
Yeah.
mistakes. And it doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
So text criticism just basically tries to weed out some of those mistakes, so that we can have the original text before us.
Mm.
So, and it's another important thing to recognize too is, there might be some who say, well, text criticism isn't necessary anymore, or things like that. But it's
Mm.
really important to recognize that textual criticism has been in the church since essentially the writing of the original documents.
Wow.
Yeah. So, like Jerome, for example, when he put the Latin Vulgate together, he mused
Okay.
between this reading and that reading. He
Mm.
referred to Lucius, and Hezekias, and there were a couple others. Origen made textual decisions. You can read through his writings, preserved by Eusebius. Like the textual criticism has always been part of the church, and then even in the
Right.
15th century, 16th century, when the Textus Receptus came about, um, every succeeding edition, there were minor adjustments made to the Textus Receptus. So
Mm.
Erasmus had 4 editions of the Textus Receptus, and he made some changes in his subsequent editions. And then Stephanus came along, and he made a couple changes. In fact, I think it's Stephanus who even put in the margins what manuscripts he was referring to when he made
Mm.
certain changes here and there. So
Right.
yeah, text criticism has always been part of the church. So it's important. And
Right.
then when we talk about manuscript traditions, what we're talking about is, excuse me, groupings of manuscripts. Because what
Mm.
happens is when you're copying a manuscript, right? One copy goes out and it may get copied 3 times or 4 times or whatever. And then there's a copy over here that gets copied this many times. And what happens is oftentimes the types of errors that happen from the scribes tend to clump up in groups. And those groups were referred to as something called text types. And
Mm,
so this is probably where you've heard the phrase Alexandrian text or Byzantine text or Caesarean text. These are just groupings of manuscripts with similar readings in them. So when we talk about manuscript traditions, this is kind of what we're talking about. And then in
okay.
the 15th century, with the advent of the printing press, we
Right.
have now a printed edition tradition. Printed edition
Mm.
tradition.
Oh,
In
okay.
the, yeah, yeah. So that's typically what we mean by manuscript tradition.
Manuscript.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I see that. And it's interesting that you even, you made the distinction between the printed edition, the original. So so how would we define that? Is it like source material? Is there a terminology to make that distinction, or just printed edition, and just manuscript?
Yeah, yeah. So we would just make the distinction between printed editions and
Mm-hmm.
manuscripts. Now,
Okay, great.
manuscripts, though, right?
Right.
When you go back into the manuscript tradition, generally
Right.
speaking, is kind of sorted out into a number of different
Groups.
ways.
Right.
Yeah, so they're kind of done on different materials. So you have papyrus manuscripts, and these are, for the most part, they're smaller.
Mm-hmm.
They're like little pages with a couple words written on it or something. There's a couple big ones with some of the whole
Right.
book, some of the entire Gospel of John or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But these are generally older manuscripts, and they're found in Egypt. And then you have unsealed manuscripts. And these refer to any manuscript where the Greek text is written in all capitals. Then you
Right.
get into around the 9th century, there was a sort of copying revolution where all the unsealed manuscripts were turned into something called minuscule writing. And this minuscule writing is more like Greek cursive, so they look very different. Like if you can read unseal, you will still have a hard time reading the minuscule. I should have prepped
Mm.
some images so that you could see the difference, but it's quite different. Like it's you get used to it when you start reading it,
Right.
but it takes a little bit of effort. So those were later produced
Mm-hmm.
later, but just because, and this is where the distinction is now, just because the manuscript itself was produced later doesn't
Okay.
necessarily mean that the readings on those manuscripts are late. And
Right.
that's kind
Right.
of like a key argument for my own position. Uh,
Right.
so so yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So we discussed manuscript tradition and textual criticism, but then what would be the end goal? So why do we do textual criticism, lower criticism, right? What's the end goal of such practice? Its usefulness of understanding the Bible that we have today,
Okay,
like
so the end,
in a general sense.
yeah. So generally speaking, text criticism, the goal is to get back to the original text. That's it.
Mm,
The text
okay.
that came off of the hand of Peter and Paul
Right.
and the evangelists. Now, of course, there's Old Testament textual criticism, but you could spend a lifetime on that. So I
Mhm.
focus my studies on New Testament work. But yeah, so the goal is just to get back to what came off the pen of the inspired authors.
Mm,
So yeah, and again, like I said earlier, that has been the goal of the church from the
right.
very beginning. When
Very early
Origen
on.
has two
Yes.
readings in front of him, he's going to go, no, this one isn't good, and I'm going with this one because I think this one's original. And
Yeah.
of course, there's ways to go about that, but that's
I
really
appreciate
getting into the weeds.
I appreciate that you highlighted, that continuity, and also the this practices was very much be able to demonstrate it evident in the early centuries of the Christian faith, and Christians very much were interested in preserving the scriptures and using this science. How I would to view it as a science in order to make sure, in order to discover, or I would say preserve, the accurate reading from the first century, and that's the goal of the textual criticism, as you
Mhm,
have pointed out. And in this discussions, usually when we talk about the Bible, generally, even when there was, I was brought up, in a Muslim country. We
mhm,
have history book, and the history we study different religions. And when it comes to the Protestant, when it comes to the Christian faith, the Christian religion, they would, highlight certain key milestone in the Christian history, and one of it would be the printing innovation,
mhm,
John Gutenberg, and then this two codexes that not whose name which name comes up all the time, generally in all the documentaries,
Yeah.
whenever people make a historical case for the for the reliability of the Bible, such as what we call the, I'm sure Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. I
Yes.
hope I'm is it Sinaiticus or Alexandrinus, Vaticanus or Sinaiticus? I'll let you explain it.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
what's with this, and why people bring this up, codex, when we talk about the Bible?
Okay. Can we share screens?
Sure, go ahead. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Let me if I go share screen, there it is. I can share my whole other screen. There it is. Okay. And there we go. Look at that. Look at that. That was quick. That was easy and painless. I like it.
Yes.
All right. Just a shout out to my friend, Mr. Moreno, who's in the comments there.
Yes.
Dwayne will take the mediocre cursives over the great unseals. Mediocre. That's all good. All right.
Yeah.
So what I'll do here is I just want to show you because
Hmm.
you're asking about Codex Vaticanus and Codex
Sinaiticus. Okay,
Sinaiticus.
Sinaiticus.
Now I
Okay, gotta
call
get
it
the terms.
I've been calling it Sinaiticus,
Okay.
but somebody in the comments of one of my YouTube videos is like, why do you say it that way? And I was like, I don't know. That's just how I said it. But
Right.
this here, what we're looking at on the screen, this is, I'll just accept that. This is Codex Vaticanus,
Vaticanus.
and
Okay.
now modern scholarship typically sees this as a very important manuscript. Personally,
Okay.
I don't necessarily see it as important as is often put out. There's a
Mm.
very important reason for that, and we'll discuss that later. But
Okay.
nonetheless, it's like a very interesting artifact here, and
Mm.
you can see uh, again all capital letters, right? This is
Mm. Mm.
and what's interesting about Vaticanus is, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see
Yeah,
where
we
I'm
can see it.
pointing? Yeah. So you see the new here, the letter N. It looks like the letter N. It's kind of in a
Okay.
different color ink than the
Okay.
rest of the text around it.
Mm.
So what happened with Vaticanus is shortly after the the scribe wrote down on it, the ink began to fade, and so another scribe came later and re-inked all of the letters,
Hmm.
with the exceptions of the ones that he didn't think were actually part of the original text. So again, there's that
Right.
whole text criticism thing happening in Codex Vaticanus. Now, Vaticanus again is very what's the term? Controversial manuscript, especially when you start talking with King James Version onlyists, because they see this as kind of like a depraved, heretical manuscript, because there are a lot of differences, and there are some differences. Like, don't get me wrong, Codex
Okay.
Vaticanus has there's a really popular reading in here about Jesus having the spear put into him, and remember when he dies
Mm-hmm.
on the cross, they spear his side, and blood and water came out,
Right.
but he was already dead at that point.
Okay.
However, Vaticanus mixes the order up and makes it appear as though the spearing is what actually killed Jesus, as opposed to
Oh.
Jesus giving up the spirit, right? So
Right.
there are little things like that.
Okay.
If I could find it, I wish I remembered what page it was on, but there's a small place in Hebrews with
Mm.
a little marginal note. So you can see there's like marginal notes in here.
So this
Uh,
is this is a practice of textual criticism over there. Is that so?
the marginal note?
Yeah. Is that part of textual
Yeah. Oh,
criticism?
yeah, yeah. Well, they'll look at the marginal notes too. So text
Right.
criticism looks at the marginal notes and references
Okay.
that. In this case, you can see that there's an addition here. So the little divider symbol refers you back to the footnote in the margin, and so
Mm.
they would want this to be um, they would want this to be added into the text, or whoever came and did the proofreading, or the scribe that came afterwards. Um, yeah, are the marginal notes like scribal notes? Um, Actually, they're more like, there can be scribal notes in there. Like, there's a number of manuscripts that have actual like commentary in there. Um,
Mm.
or like you have canons, like here, these symbols on the side are a way to find passages quickly, because they didn't have chapter and verse back then.
Right.
The Eusebian canon is one of those like things that help you determine where a reading is at a quick glance. But in
Okay.
this case, this would be a textual note. So the
Mm.
symbol points you back here to say, hey, we think this should be added. And this was added by a later scribe. When I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, so this is Vaticanus, and Vaticanus apparently has some similarities with it
Mm-hmm.
to the Coptic manuscripts. Coptic is Egyptian. So what
Mm.
happened is somebody got a hold of a manuscript that was very similar to Vaticanus,
Right.
and translated Greek into Coptic. And so there's a
Right.
link between Vaticanus and Coptic.
Mm.
So I would call Vaticanus an Egyptian manuscript because it reflects
Okay.
an Egyptian text base or an Alexandrian text base.
Mm.
So that's when we start getting into those groupings of manuscripts.
Groupings.
Yeah.
And
But
the groupings, sorry to cut you off,
yeah,
Pastor.
yeah.
So when it comes to the groupings, and these names, is it based on the location that these manuscripts were discovered, or because of its tradition in terms of the how it's being transmitted? Is there a particular school of thought, or I would say, trying to find the right terminology over here, a
Like
practice?
why is it called Alexandrian?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So Alexandria and Egypt, Egyptian-based manuscript, text-based.
Yeah, so there's a geographic component to it, right?
Okay.
Because one of the major schools, or sorry, schools, one of the major libraries
Right.
from antiquity is the
Mm.
Library of Alexandria. There was another
Okay.
library in Caesarea, and another school in Caesarea. Um,
Mm.
Interestingly enough, Origen in the third century, I believe, second to third century, he
Right.
was kind of like headmaster of the school of Alexandria. So we want to be careful here because there's this whole two streams theology that you often hear,
Okay.
especially from King James Version onlyists, which will say, well, the Alexandrian manuscript's bad and Caesarean manuscripts are good, but that's way too simplified. Um,
Right.
but there is a library in Alexandria, and what happened is when these manuscripts were discovered and were being classified, the work of Westcott and Hort specifically, probably heard those names. These were scholars from the 1800s.
Those are very contentious
They are
contentious
very
names.
contentious names. Yeah, I
Yes.
personally, I think they slowed down the progress of textual criticism, um,
Okay.
but nonetheless, I'm not here to like slander or to argue
Right.
per
Right.
se, but just to spell out some of the history here.
Mm.
And so Westcott and Hort came along, and they kind of, with the help of others.
Mm.
So it's not just them, but they, their edition got really popular, so everything comes down on them.
Right.
Um, but they sort of began classifying the manuscripts into four groups, right? Remember those
Okay.
similar readings, and that's where we get Caesarean. Well, Caesarean came later, but that's where we get the Alexandrian, Western, and Byzantine text from. Now, it's called the Alexandrian text because it is thought, right? It is thought that the Alexandrian text was the result of a recension that happened in Alexandria. And the Byzantine text is called the Byzantine text because it is thought to have been a result of what's called a recension. That's deliberate editing, somebody collecting everything together and officializing a text
Hmm.
from the East, the area known as Byzantium a little bit later.
Right.
And then the Western text was clearly the result of editing in the Latin tradition.
Mm.
So, yeah, there is definitely a geographical component. And so, what has happened is every discovery of every manuscript that has come up since then is scholars will typically look at them and try to classify them based on these. And there's a number of systems to do so. But often what you have is there really aren't very many pure representatives of the Alexandrian text type. Oftentimes the manuscripts are mixed with other text types and makes it hard to classify
Mm.
them. So except for the Byzantine text, okay, just that's the important bit is the Byzantine text is definitely a large group of manuscripts that exists as a type. So
Right.
you move on a little bit later in history, and now up to the advent of a new method of trying to pull everything together. They're sort of
Hmm.
rejecting the idea of text types because uh, they're not entirely certain that these groupings of manuscripts, which are definitely true based on some
Mm.
recent research, right?
Okay.
Um, they're not sure that these arose from deliberate editorial activity, that they
Right.
just clustered themselves. And so now you'll probably hear the term clusters. So these are textual clusters in story
Right.
instead of textual text types.
Text types
So
or
yeah,
manuscript traditions.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the key term that I was looking for, the editorial practices. That's the
What
one.
what's that?
That's the one I was looking for. The correct terminology. I was in my understanding is that how are these manuscripts being clustered? Is it based upon, obviously there's a geographical component to it, but also
Yes.
editorial practices? That's the terminology I was looking for.
Right, right. And it's starting to look as though editorial practices, or I should say officializing a text in a general area,
Mm,
was not the cause, that just kind of happened in this way. So it's a whole interesting discussion on how manuscripts and stuff are classified. Um,
right.
but yeah, so Vaticanus is supposed to be a very good representation of the Alexandrian text type. So I have here also Codex Sinaiticus. I'm
Mm-hmm.
calling it Sinaiticus. I don't care what anyone says.
Yeah,
Sin-
yeah, yeah.
All right.
Cyanide, Sinaticus.
I think I think people just call it Codex Sinaiticus.
Yeah.
Sinaiticus.
Okay.
But I mean, you have it here, right?
Right.
It's again, very beautiful manuscript, right? And these both Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are supposedly from the 4th century. Unfortunately, there's no dates on the manuscript, so
Of course.
yeah. So a bunch of analysis is done on the writing style to kind of get a
Mm,
general ballpark of when it might have been written.
right.
Sometimes there's notes and stuff that help you with that, but generally not. You don't start
Right.
seeing notes of when a manuscript was written until uh, later in the 11th to 15th century.
That's pretty
So
interesting because given the modern practice is that whenever we write something, we write the date first. Isn't that so? Right? Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was wondering why isn't that is that something peculiar, strange to the antiquity transmission practices or something like that when it comes to text, like ancient texts?
Of writing
Any
dates on it.
reasoning? Yeah, any reasoning why they don't write why they didn't write dates?
Yeah,
I thought it would be important, no?
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I've never considered that. Like I
Right.
said, generally it's not formalized,
Right, right.
and you don't start seeing that kind of stuff until a little later, when it'll
Mm,
say something like, scribe so and so wrote this in the 1500th year of our Lord or something like that.
yeah.
But generally you don't see that. So it's very rare to see a date. So
Mm,
I'm pulling this page up in Codex Sinaiticus. Again, this is a 4th century manuscript because it's worth showing you this because it's interesting.
right.
Um, is so Mark 16. Let me minimize this here. These buttons are a little bit. Oh, I got to go to the next page. Hang on here. How do I
They
get to the
have
next page?
they have digitized this. Wow. I
Yeah.
remember
Oh,
my
yeah.
pastor even has the printed edition with him. He carries around
Yeah. Yeah.
the
It's
New
a very
Testament
big,
edition.
very
Yeah.
big, very expensive book. Yeah, you see, to get the what they call the facsimile edition.
Right.
But anyway, so what is happening here? Is this Mark 16? Yeah, it is. Yeah, so what's happening here in Codex Sinaiticus, right? So Mark
Mm,
16, 9 through 20 is a very contentious passage, right?
right.
So if you know anything about Mark 16, 9 through 20, that's Jesus
Hot
commissioning
topic.
his he's Jesus is commissioning his disciples, and he says, "Go and preach the gospel to every creature, cast out
Mm,
devils, heal the sick, he'll speak with new tongues."
mm.
The stuff like I don't. Are you a continuationist? Can I ask that?
No, not necessarily. Yeah, yeah.
No. Okay.
I'm
So
okay
not
with it.
necessarily,
Uh,
right?
yeah, 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 yeah. Not
Yeah.
necessarily, but also not really hard on this. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, a Pentecostal minister, right? This is a great
Right.
passage. Mark 16, 9 through 20 has some awesome, very
Validation.
Pentecostal things in there.
Right.
So I like the passage, and the passage has to stay. Um, not because I like the passage, but because it's got a very strong textual basis for it.
Mm,
However, Codex Sinaiticus doesn't have it. And what you're looking
mm.
at here is a blank column
Right.
where Mark 16, 9 through 20 should be. And what's
Mm,
interesting is these blank columns, they don't really happen all that often. At least not in Vatican. I think Vatican is the other one. This one here, there were
mm.
replacement pages added, and they stretched the
Right.
text to make up the space for some room here, suggesting that possibly this manuscript did initially have Mark 16, 9 through 20 in it. Now,
Intentionally left.
again, I understand that there's a little bit of conjecture there, but it is weird that the letters are
Mm,
squished to try to fit a little bit more in there than the rest of the
mm.
manuscript. Um, the other interesting thing here is the little flourishing here, and then what you have. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit so we can get a little bit more detail. Um, you have here Evangelion Kata Markon, and this is the
Mm,
end of the book. So they put the title at the end of the book instead of the beginning. I mean, at the beginning, but at the end also. So you
right.
got Markon there and Katalukan at the top. So again, Sinaiticus, a very interesting manuscript, but I don't think that it's the be all end all. So somebody had
Mm,
actually done a study and tried to see what the differences were between Codex Sinaiticus and
mm,
Codex Vaticanus. I think this was not Scrivener. Maybe it was either Scrivener or Burgon. I can't remember
mm.
who. But what they discovered is in the Gospel alone, there were 3,000 differences between Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus.
And
Um,
these codexes are contemporary within the same period of time, like same
yeah,
period.
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's
supposedly
interesting.
there's some questions surrounding the date. I think of Vaticanus. There was some testing done on the ink, and I
Okay.
guess we're awaiting some further testing to determine what the date is. But the general scholarly consensus is that 350 to 350 to 400 are the date of these manuscripts, and so they're the current scholarly consensus is that they are contemporaneous.
Mm.
So yeah, um, yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah. So that was, an extensive, I would say, history behind these two major
Mhm.
artifacts. The reason, I wanted to have some exposition about this is, people say things about it, but I think just on the historical level, it is something that goes back in time. And besides the textual criticism, which I'm not expert, like generally many people are not expert on this to comment about, what they are doing is that they're just parroting about certain bias that has been passed down.
Mhm.
But for me, I see it differently. I see it like the practice itself, like the very tradition to preserve the scriptures, but also making it codex. Correct me if I'm wrong. The very practice of making it codex was like a book
Mhm.
a form began from was from the Christians. Is that so?
Yeah, so
Is
there's a
there?
lot of
Yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
uh, yeah, there's a ton of debate surrounding that, right?
Oh, okay.
So the advent of the Codex was
Hmm.
definitely popularized by Christians, for sure, hands
Okay.
down, no question. Like there's no
Okay.
the question of when did the Codex begin, and
Right.
were the
Right.
New Testament books written on scrolls or were they written on a codex?
Right.
And
Okay.
I think the codex begins popping up around that era. So we don't
Mm.
anyone who says they
Obviously.
know that it was written on a scroll, I don't think they really do, right? Like I think
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of like we just don't know. We just don't know. We don't
Yeah.
have the original copies. We don't know. Maybe you could make some sort of statistical argument or something that say maybe it was more likely to be written on a scroll or a book. But again, I haven't dived deeply into that issue. I just know that the convergent point for the popularization of the book form, the
Mm.
Codex,
Mm.
was right around when the New Testament was written. So
Interesting.
unless we
That that's
find,
that's
yeah, go
still a
ahead.
win. That's still a
Yeah,
win.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I'll take that safe, safer position over there, like popularized. I mean, that's still a win for me. I would
that's
say.
right. That's right.
Uh, right. Thank you so much for that. And now, as you have expounded on this manuscript tradition, we have heard there's some names, Alexandria, Byzantine,
Mhm.
Texas Receptus, and so forth. I guess now is I would say the golden time where part of the discussion is that just talk to us, explain, introduce to us the manuscript traditions that we have currently and just how many they are, or the major ones, as however you want to educate us in this
Sure.
particular. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes down to determining what the text is of the New
Hmm.
Testament, like the original text, what came off the hands of the apostles, um, in your English Bible translations, you're going to see two streams.
Okay.
And I said, don't do two streams argument. But for
Let me
the
take notes. I mean,
yeah,
because like the
yeah.
two streams argument, it's very popular on YouTube, but I want to hear from you.
Yeah, when I say two streams, I do not mean it in the same way. I do not
Okay.
mean Antioch good and Alexandrian bad. That's not what I mean when I say two streams.
Okay.
But
Perfect.
there are legitimately two groups. We'll just say groups so I don't mix up streams, and then the King James Version only can continue to use their streams argument. So you got two groups of New Testaments in English. You've got
Okay.
those that are based on the modern critical text,
Okay.
modern critical editions, and then you have those that are based on the Textus Receptus. There's a
TR.
third grouping. Yep, there's a third grouping, which generally I just call it majority text. So
Majority.
you've got modern critical editions, Textus
Mm-hmm.
Receptus editions, and majority text editions. There's some
Mm,
subgroupings under. There's actually subgroupings under all of them, but I think those three divisions will help you out. So when you're looking for a Bible, if you get anything that has been printed after the 1900s,
mm,
generally it's going to be a modern critical edition. Um, if you have a King James version, it's going to be a Textus Receptus. If you have a New
mm,
King James version or a modern English version, it's going to be a Textus Receptus. And then
mm.
currently, there are very few Bible translations of the majority text. There's one from Adam Boyd. The Majority Standard Bible from Bible Hub is also majority text.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another one called the New Jerusalem version. I
Okay.
think someone from the Netherlands has did a little bit of work on that.
Right.
So there are kind of like represent, but for the most part, whatever's produced after the 1900s is generally going to be under the modern critical editions, right?
Mm.
So
Where does sorry, Pastor. Where does Byzantine comes in? Or w-
so
yeah.
Byzantine text is a subset of the majority text
Oh,
because
okay. So it's a subset of majority text.
yeah,
Okay.
generally speaking, in fact, I would call the majority a subset of the Byzantine text. Maybe I should just rephrase that. So we have the Byzantine text, and the majority
Okay.
is the subset of that.
So critical Texas Receptors and Byzantine is the three major ones, and majority is
Yes.
a subset of Byzantine.
Yeah, yeah. I would phrase it like that. I don't
Okay.
think everyone would, but I mean, it's helpful to understand what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so when you get a Bible translation like the New American Standard Bible, the New Living Translation, the English Standard Version, the Christian Standard Bible, right? Pick your Bible. Chances
Mm.
are it's going to be from the modern critical edition. We'll talk about important differences between them in a moment, but just so you understand, if you buy a new one, you go to the Christian bookshelf, a Christian
Right.
bookstore, you buy one, it's going to be modern critical text. You might hear it called the modern eclectic text. It just means the same thing, generally
Okay.
speaking.
Yeah. That eclectic term. If you don't mind, just a bit. What do they mean by eclectic?
Eclectic means it's picked and chosen on a variant by variant basis. So
Okay.
yeah, each variant is going to be selected based on a number of principles. I don't think we'll get into those principles of selection today because that's
Sure.
like
Sure.
a
Sure. Yeah.
series of
That's
videos.
yeah
But
huge. Yeah.
yeah, so modern eclecticism uses certain principles to decide which readings are the right ones to put into the text.
So they don't
And
have a standard. What they do is that they take different texts and then they apply a principle and just merge it together. Is that a fair?
yeah, they apply a principle to make a decision. So
Right.
for example, when you come to a reading, so 1 Timothy 3:16,
Mm.
he who was manifest in the flesh, right? Great is
Okay.
the mystery of godliness, he who was manifest in the flesh. That's the critical text reading. But the Textus Receptus and the Byzantine reading is great is the mystery of godliness, God was manifest in the flesh. So there's a
Right.
definite distinction there, and a very important
Sure.
one, right? Because
Mm.
God manifest in the flesh makes explicit the divinity of Jesus, whereas
Mm.
he who is manifest in the flesh isn't as explicit, right? So the modern critical editions will come, or the modern critical scholars will come to this, and they will say, okay, we have our principles, we're going to apply our principles, and our principles, what they do is they take us to the reading as he who is manifest in the flesh is original. Now,
Based on like the
so
principle, which is like how many manuscript. Obviously, we're not going into the principle, but I'm just trying to synthesize, basically saying that they come together based on this varying readings. and then they decide upon the text.
Yeah, so a principle might be something like the harder reading is to be preferred, right? It's a very we call that a canon of textual criticism. These principles, or the shorter reading is to be preferred, lectio
Mm.
brevior, right? And of course, these are principles which are disputed, right? There's lots of
Yes,
discussions around,
yes. Like
especially
what's
the shorter reading.
justification and
Yeah,
so forth. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So he who is manifest in the flesh, and then they would take a look at, what kind of witnesses do we have? Oh, these manuscripts are older. We prefer older manuscripts over the majority, and so we're going to go with those, right? So it's it's
Right.
it's just decisions based on things like that. And so what happens is in the modern, and this is really important, right? The main difference in methodology between modern eclectics and the majority text or the Byzantine text is that modern eclecticism doesn't hang much weight on the majority at all. And what
Mm.
happens, you can oftentimes have a reading with very little manuscript support because they weigh manuscripts like Vaticanus and Sinaiticus so highly.
Right.
Yeah, there's a number of places where the modern critical editions have made a choice of a reading essentially, right?
Mm.
Essentially based on the witness of Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, even though 95% of all the other manuscripts go with another reading. So
Wow. Interesting.
yeah, and again, why do they do that? Because their principles guide them in that way. Um,
Okay.
so so that's
Interesting.
what happens with modern eclecticism. Um, then with the Byzantine text, it's another set of principles, right? The Byzantine though represents the vast majority of the manuscripts that we have. So whereas modern eclecticism goes with a few deemed important manuscripts, the Byzantine text goes, okay, well, we have 98% of all the manuscripts, maybe okay,
Mm.
90 to 95, which go with this reading, and it was the reading that was propagated by the church. So we put that in. Now,
Mm.
of course, it's more complicated than that, but generally speaking. So what you have, right, is do you go with the older, fewer
Mm.
manuscripts, or do you go with the super majority of older manuscripts? And that's really where this boils down to. So
The
the Texas
deciding factor. Yeah.
yeah, the Texas Receptus, because it was based on what Erasmus had at the time, naturally is much closer to the majority text. So you could kind of put the TR under a majority label if you want to make it really easy,
Mm.
even though it's its own separate tradition. Um, but yeah, that's the crux of the argument right there. Do you go with the
Interesting.
very few, or do you go with the wider tradition? Um, so so yeah.
Right. So that's very interesting the way how you present it in terms of the you're already presenting a case for majority. I can see already
Sure.
there. So the older few versus super majority reading. But also another thing that something that is more persuasive is that the wider reading, like the
Mhm.
reception church universal.
Yeah.
And just one last point before we move to the next one would be, so when you say Byzantine, is it because it was preserved in the east or
Yes.
because okay,
Yeah, so
preserved in the
it's called
east?
the Byzantine text because it was basically produced and propagated in the East in the Byzantium Empire. So
Okay.
that's where it gets its name from. Again, it's just sort of a geographic thing.
Right,
So
right.
let me just
Interesting.
share one more thing here. I don't know how much time you have, Silas.
I have time. I mean, I'm
Okay.
at your mercy.
Oh well, there you
I'm at
go.
your grace. My
We're gonna
apologies.
be
I'm
here
at
till
your
3
grace.
in the morning. I do like six
Yeah.
hour live. No, I don't do 6 hour live streams. So I have this here. Some of you might know what it is. Okay. And
Yes.
this is interesting because this is actually not the same as the standard eclectic text that you have
Mm.
underlying most English Bible translations. This one specifically underlies the New International Version. And the reason why
Mm.
this is so interesting, remember how I was talking about minority readings? There's
Okay.
a reading in Mark 141. You might know about it. Jesus, he's there's a crowd around him, and a leper comes to Jesus and wants his hand healed. And our Bibles typically say that Jesus was filled with compassion and then
Mm.
healed him.
Okay.
But the NIV, the 2011 specifically, I think, doesn't have Jesus filled with compassion. It has Jesus as filled with anger. And okay, what is going on there? Like the Greek,
What?
yeah, or versus Splank needs to say, they are not even close. Like this is not something you make a mistake and put in there, right? So what the NIV
Yeah,
did
it's
there is
true.
yeah,
It's true.
there's this one reading. Okay, remember I was talking
Okay.
about the principles of textual criticism. One of
Okay.
the principles is that the harder reading is to be preferred. So when you have a
That's
textual variant
justification.
that says that Jesus had compassion on the guy with the withered arm,
Mm,
or that he was angry. Now, again, maybe you could interpret that as saying he was angry with the situation, or maybe with the Pharisees. Sure, okay, maybe you can. It's hard to read it that way. Um, but you have him either angered or you have him filled with compassion. Now, of course, right? The easier reading is that Jesus filled with compassion. Why? Because we know Jesus'
yes.
character. We know that he's like that. He loves people. He wants to heal them. He wants to do God's will, right? And then but the reading that he was angered, well, we don't like to think about an angry Jesus, even though
Yeah.
there's the tables, right? Flipping the tables over. So that angry Jesus, that's the harder reading. And so the NIV committee, specifically the NIV, you're not going to find that in any other English Bible translation except the NIV. And the
That's
reason
interesting.
is remember how I was talking about those minority readings, is
Right.
that reading only exists in one Greek manuscript. Out of
One.
1,600 manuscripts, it exists in one Greek manuscript and a couple in the Latin translations.
And
And
they
that
choose
is,
to go with one.
yeah, and that's Codex D, because they have weighed the canon of the difficult reading as more important than the number of witnesses that are available.
Mm,
Now, what's wild, okay, Codex D, okay, that's a 5th century manuscript. It's called Codex Bezae. It's from what we call the Western text type. And the Western text type is known for expansion, for paraphrasing, for just doing weird things. And
mm,
specifically, Codex D is not a good manuscript to be making textual decisions on. If Codex D is on your side, that's not a good sign.
mm.
Anyway, it's one of those things, right? And again, I'm not saying get rid of your NIV and burn them. Don't do that, right? I know
Right.
people who are reading the NIV and they are growing in their faith and they are doing well and they're, they're good, godly people. Um, but these are the things, right, that you should be
Yes.
aware of, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Um, so
Absolutely.
yeah, so generally speaking, um I prefer to go with the Byzantine text, with the
Mm,
wider grouping of manuscripts, than to go
mm.
with a selection of a subjective judgment based on
Yeah.
some manuscript that's kind of weird.
Yeah. My basic understanding, when just reading as a layperson, is that the one of the evidence or the attestation for a particular reading is that how much evidence do we have, like how much of that manuscript supports the particular reading. So I'm surprised that that version chose to go with the hard reading, especially given the
Mhm.
fact that, wow, in 1600 manuscripts, 1600 manuscripts, they went with one. So that's a
Mhm.
pretty interesting one. So
Yeah.
obviously the philosophy behind it, I don't understand how they justify it, but there's something for us to get to know as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Now
yeah.
I need to be clear too, right? There are many confessing Christians who are modern
Mhm.
eclectics, right? Who follow
Okay.
the modern eclectic methods, and I believe they're sincere, and I believe they're Christians. And this is one of those things that is going to be discussed to the ends of the earth, kind of like Calvinism and Arminianism. Like you just got to get over it and recognize that these guys are your brothers.
Mm,
So but yeah, this is like one of those in-house debates or discussion topics that comes up, and I personally am not satisfied with modern eclecticism and the way that it runs. So, but yeah, I just want to say that we can have these discussions without getting vitriolic, and
right.
without like having any major fallouts or anything like that,
I
because yeah,
agree.
there are good,
Yeah.
sincere people on both sides of the question.
That's the pastor's heart over there, I can
There you
see.
go. Yeah.
There you go. That's why we need to have pastors who
Mm,
communicate certain historical positions in this manner, so that people don't misunderstand, as if like
that's
really
right.
lack in that matter, right? And cause really division. There's obviously positive case, and there's lots of, I mean, the amount of persuasion is there. I can
Hmm.
see. I totally understand. It's just the preference, and also
Yeah,
really sometimes with the presupposition that we come from. It could be denomination, it could be the
it's
sociological
true.
framework, and all these things, we have taken into consideration of how one chooses a particular manuscript tradition. That's a separate subject to obviously discuss. Now, since we have got to know this, manuscript traditions such as which we have understood, modern critical, Textus Receptus, Byzantine, and a subset of it would be called majority. And Textus Receptus also can be in some way
Mhm.
under Byzantine text type. Is that a fair,
Yeah,
accurate
yeah. I
represent?
mean, there are some differences, right?
Okay,
So
so but
they're just
basically there's
not as
three.
they're not as extensive as the differences that we see with the modern eclectic method.
Correct.
So I
Okay,
can give
yeah.
you a couple examples. So in Revelation chapter
Mm,
22, we have the warning in there that says, "If
mm,
anyone adds to these words, God will add unto him the plagues which are written in this book, and if anyone takes away, God will take away his part of the book of life or the
right.
tree of life." So what's
Mm,
interesting here is that there is almost no support for the reading. And I always get it mixed up, book or tree. There's almost no support for the reading in the Textus Receptus. It
mm,
clearly came over from the Latin. They wanted a tree of life. That's what it was, tree of life. Um,
right.
but
Right.
the Greek tradition is adamantly book of life there. So again, you have these kind of interesting readings, or another one in Revelation 16:5 or 16:8. It's
Okay.
he who was, who is, and is holy, or he
Yes,
who
yes.
was and is to come. And he who
Right.
was and is to come, there isn't any Greek manuscripts available with that reading. So
Mm,
he who was and is holy is the actual reading, but the Textus Receptus goes with the one where there aren't any Greek manuscripts. Now there's some debate as to whether or not Beza, when he put that in there, had a manuscript in hand. Some say he didn't, and you're just misrepresenting his Latin phrase, and others say he didn't. But nonetheless, even if there was one, I mean, the Textus Receptus in that specific instance is not really Byzantine reading. And
mm.
there's a couple
So
more, couple in Acts and stuff like that.
that's where the divergence is when it comes to this subset, close proximity, but then it still can be considered subset.
Yeah,
I do
I
understand.
got corrected in the comments. Mr. Moreno, he says tree is the Greek reading. Okay.
Ah,
All right.
okay.
So I get those mixed up, but you get the point. Is that the Textus Receptus went with the
Tree is the
reading?
correct reading, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
hey, I could even just pull it up real quick and just
Yeah,
double
yeah,
check.
sure,
I
sure.
always get that wrong. Here, got it here. Revelation 22.
Because I was looking at one Bible translation that uses critical. Uh, it uses tree of life, and KJV uses tree of life.
Yeah, yeah, tree. That's it.
Yeah.
15, 22, 18,
Let me
19.
see. Due Reims.
That's
Oh, Due.
Latin. Dewey Reams is a
Oh,
Latin New Testament. Yeah, translated into
so
English.
the book of life should be, I think, New International
Yeah,
Version.
a Tree of Life is the Byzantine reading. Book of Life is the
Tree.
TR reading. That's it. Book of Life. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So the TR has Book of Life. There we go. TR has Book of Life, based on actually, depending who you ask, based on a translation from Latin into Greek, because apparently Erasmus did not have a copy of Revelation that had those last couple verses in it. So at least
Mm.
that's a story that's told. Again, that's contentious, but
Can I correct myself?
yes,
Um, the Byzantine reading is Tree of Life.
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So if I may ask, I'm
Actually,
seeing here.
that's not even true. The Greek reading is Tree of Life. Like it's not
Oh, the
even
Greek
questioned.
reading.
Yeah, like
Okay.
there's no question that it's Tree of Life.
But
But
why does the Greek, sorry, the King James version, I'm looking it up at Bible Gateway, says Tree of Life as well instead of Book of Life. Perhaps
maybe
they,
I'm mixing those up.
yeah,
The
I apologize. So is there a revision? Like it depends on the like TR edition, which one?
Oh, now I have
Um,
to. Hang on. Let me just grab my. I'll just grab it and look it up here. This is what happens when you do too much. You get things all mixed up. So I'll give you the reading
yes, yes,
from
no
the
worries,
Modern
no worries.
Critical Edition. This is the UBS 5. So this is the UBS 5.
Mm,
It is the latest update to the Modern Critical Editions. The 6 Actually, the 6s, it just came out. And
Mm.
there's some interesting things going on with the 6th edition, but
You
that's
are really
beyond
into this.
yeah, that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. We just want to solve this. Um, yeah, so to Silu. So it's tree of life. Tree of life is in the critical editions, in our modern
Mm.
English Bibles, in the Byzantine
Yes.
text. And then book
Right.
of life will be in the King James Version and the
Mm.
New King James Version. And so book of life doesn't have any Greek support. If
Mm.
maybe there's one or two. My understanding is that there wasn't any. Um, yeah, Book of Life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Mr. Moreno put it up there. He's good. Yeah.
Right.
So again, this is one of those places where the Textus Receptus is not Byzantine. And there's a couple places like it's not huge. There's not many places like this in the Textus Receptus, which is why I say like if you're using a Textus Receptus,
Mm.
you're probably good to go, because
Mm.
most of the other textual variants are generally minor and don't have much change or much impact on what we do as Christians.
Right.
Do I think the TR is the best? I think it's a lot better than the modern critical editions. However, I would roll with a Byzantine text.
Yes.
So yeah, go ahead.
So
Sorry.
so out of the yeah, the out of these three manuscript editions, you have come to a position of Byzantine priority. So let's hear your thoughts on that and why that's the case of it. So, and what particular Bible translation uses this Byzantine priority text type?
Okay, so I'll start with saying that I use the New King James Version generally for teaching and preaching. I read from the King James Version just because I like it,
Okay.
and sometimes I'll refer to another edition like the Berean Standard Bible or the Christian Standard Bible or something. But my primary Bible is the New King James Version, and the reason
Mm.
is because in the New King James Version you have textual notes, and they have textual
Mm.
notes that tell you the differences between the Textus Receptus, the majority text, and the modern critical editions. So you have those
Wow.
footnotes that actually, so you can get a pretty good idea. Now it's not
Right.
perfect, but you can get a pretty good idea of what the majority text or the Byzantine text is with the
Mm.
New King James Version, whereas you don't really have that same kind of thing going on with the other translations. Except the Berean Standard Bible. If you're going to go modern critical edition, the Berean Standard Bible has pretty good footnotes in there. The New English translation has a lot of textual footnotes, but a lot of those footnotes are outdated. So you
Mm.
got to be
You mean
careful
the
there.
NET, right?
Yeah,
NET,
the
you
NET.
mean?
Yeah, so a
Right.
number of the notes are actually rather outdated. They
Mm.
typically parrot another guy who, his work was really popular in the like 60s and 70s.
Right.
But now some new stuff has come out, and so much. I won't say much of it, but some of the stuff you see in the NET, you should double check that when it comes to text critical questions. But yeah, so I use the New King James Version.
Mm.
And again, the reason is because of those footnotes. We can see what the majority readings are in the New Testament. We can see what the Byzantine text is, generally speaking. Now, the reason why I prefer the Byzantine text, and this is where we get into the fun part, is a couple of reasons. So
Okay.
the easiest one is because it just simply is the text that has been transmitted through the history of the church. I would say back to the original. All right. Uh,
Mm.
You go into scholarship from the 1800s, and it's generally conceded that the
Mhm.
Byzantine text goes back at least as far back as the 4th century.
Wow.
So, so of course, I'll argue that it goes back further. Um, but either of the text types have a beginning that's very early.
Mm.
Now, that has been transmitted by the church, and other forms of the text generally have not been. So we have incredible numbers of the Byzantine manuscripts. And so there are something like 5,800,
Mm.
5,700, somewhere around there. We don't have an exact count.
Right.
It's difficult to get that. But and of those, about 90 to 95% of those manuscripts represent the Byzantine text type.
Mm.
So now
90 to
majority
90.
is a thing, right? Like I don't
Okay.
want to say like I'm basing my argument on the majority text. I'm not basing it entirely on majority.
Appeal
But
to
you
majority.
also, yeah, but you also shouldn't ignore the majority. And I think
Yes.
what modern criticism does is it ignores the majority. And so you end up
Right.
with a reading like Mark 141, Jesus being angry instead of filled with compassion.
Mm,
So a majority, I call it a super majority, because oftentimes what happens is a reading that has majority support is almost always more than 95 to 99%. Almost always. Where it gets
mm,
tricky is when you have like a split that's like 60-40 or something. Then you have to do a little bit more work. Um, the other reason why I think the Byzantine text makes more sense is geographically, it was said to be produced in the East. And when you look at the Apostle Paul and who he writes his epistles to, for example, or where the
mm.
gospel circulated, where were they?
Right.
Right? They were
Yeah.
in the East, which became the Byzantine Empire. Um, so when you start talking about Alexandrian manuscripts, you have to ask the question: well, which books of the Bible were actually written to people in Egypt, in Alexandria, in
Right.
Carthage, in the West? Like, which books of the Bible were written there? None of them were, right?
Mm,
Um,
mm, mm.
so, so you have so when you go with the modern eclectic method, which favors the Egyptian manuscripts, right, which favors the Alexandrian text, there's an added step that the original text will have to have traversed the landscape and made it into Alexandria and have been collated by whoever is doing the work in the library there. Um, and then you have that, so it's like a second source.
Mm.
Again, in my opinion, it just doesn't work. We have better attestation for the not better attestation, but it just makes more sense
Mm.
that the place where the books were originally written to would
Right.
maintain a pure form of the text than somewhere 1,000 miles away.
Right.
That works out. And then we already so those are generally three arguments, and the third one being that it was the text copied by the church, which I think we stated already.
Right.
Um,
Much more stable, especially given I would say the East becoming the new capital of the Roman Empire. So there
that's
was
right.
much more activity and preservation activity of preservation over there. But there's also the other side to look into is that how would you respond to where it's like, okay, well, I mean, a lot of manuscripts were discovered in Egypt prior, particularly because of its the location, and also
Mhm.
given the weather that is very conducive for the preservation of the scrolls. Does that have any effect into this idea, the talk, the subject of manuscript tradition, or is just very isolated, nothing to do with it?
Well, it does, because those are the manuscripts that are favored by modern eclecticism. Because generally, right, the papyrus
Hmm.
are older, generally, and right, remember,
Mm,
generally speaking, the older the better. So my issue here is that
mm,
oftentimes the papyrus manuscripts and these Egyptian manuscripts that geographically come from there, it's assumed, and this is the thing, is it's assumed, it's not proved, it's assumed, and
okay.
no evidence has been proffered that I'm aware of, that the kind of text that we find amongst the Egyptian papyri, that they are a reflection of what the New Testament looked like in the wider Roman Empire. That's just
Mm,
assumed. And I'm here saying, no, we can't make that assumption, because what we
right.
have over here is this big mass of manuscripts that is very coherent with one another. And we
Mm,
don't have an explanation, or I should say, you don't have an explanation of where this came from.
right.
So
Right.
it's been tried before. So in the 1800s, again, we come back to our friends Westcott and Horde. In their
Right.
introduction, they tried to explain this massive Byzantine manuscripts
Mm,
through what's called recension theory. And so what he
okay.
said is that somebody came along somewhere between 3 and 400, somewhere in the 4th century, and collected a bunch of manuscripts and
Mm.
produced and edited an official church text, and that became the Byzantine text. And so in his
Oh,
introduction, yeah, he even went
right.
on to suggest that maybe Lucian of Antioch, maybe he was the one responsible
Yeah.
for doing this. And then
Mm,
as time went on, um, textual scholars tended to get a little bit more dogmatic on that. So whereas Westcott and Hort were just kind of like, yeah, you know what, Lucian kind of fits the bill. Metzger comes along and he goes, no, it was definitely Lucian of Antioch. He did it. The Byzantine text came from him. And then you go to Dan Wallace, which I'm sure you know who he is. Dan Wallace comes along and creates his tutorial stuff and says Lucian of Antioch did it for sure. So you can see things
Wow.
get more dogmatic. But what has happened is generally now modern textual criticism, that modern scholars, modern eclectics, have largely rejected the Lucianic recension theory because there's just no evidence that it happened. There just
Mm.
is nothing. What we have, we know for sure that Lucian did some work in the Old Testament, and he did some
Right.
work specifically in the Psalms, but he didn't do. There's no evidence to say that he moved on and did anything with the New Testament. So that's
Yeah.
just hearsay. So you go back to Westcott and Hort, and they go, well, maybe kind of, sort of, Lucian sort of fits the bill, maybe, but we know it was edited. Um, so
Mm.
with that no longer in vogue, a new theory has come out, and this is a paper in 1995 written by Klaus Wachtel called the process theory. And what the process theory suggests, and this is relatively new, I've just been looking into this over the last 2 weeks, maybe. And so, what the process view suggests is that, well, maybe this massive Byzantine manuscripts that we don't know where it came from, maybe it was the result of a long, unguided process that ended up making all of these manuscripts cohere together really well. Now, again,
Mm.
on the face of it, I just don't see that working. Like, what kind of unguided, long, drawn out process makes
Mm.
things cohere instead of
Correct.
diverge? Right?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
that? Right?
Yeah.
Nothing. Nothing. Nothing that I am
Right.
aware of.
Yeah.
So the problem with the process view, and the reason why there's not so much on it right now, is because the initial paper to kind of push that off was written in German, and of course I don't speak or read German, so it's going to be a hard time. There's some stuff coming out here and there on it, so but
Right.
I would love to see, like, how would that happen? Like,
Mm.
I was a software developer before I was a pastor, and when you're managing a project, if you don't manage the project, people go their own
Mm.
ways,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You've got
True.
to
True.
manage it in order to keep it coherent.
Correct.
So if there's no recension and it's coherent, and the process view doesn't work and it's coherent, well, maybe the scribes are just really good at copying because that was their job, and
Mm.
they kept our original manuscripts in relatively decent shape. I
Mm.
think that explains it much better.
The name Lucian of Antioch rings a bell because it does come up in, I think, in prior, I think, in somewhat before the Arian during the Arian crisis.
Yes.
um and I've heard also the KJV only advocates, right? They
Mhm.
also have appealed to Lucian of Antioch being the so-called the preserver, I mean the individual who actually preserved the text from being corrupted. Am I saying it correctly? Is there a kind of
I'm not.
connection?
I don't hear that connection. The one that I often hear is Athanasius.
Oh, right.
So yeah, during
Interesting.
the Arian controversy, Athanasius was kind of like the lone rider who stood up to the big wigs, right, and
Oh, yeah,
fought
yeah.
for the divinity of Christ. And so this is very specific to the Comma Joanneum, right? 1 John
Mm,
5:7, which is very popular textual critical discussion.
mm,
Generally speaking, it's not in the Byzantine texts. It's not in the modern critical editions, but it's in the Textus Receptus. And
mm.
so there's lots of theories as to why it got into the Textus Receptus. And I don't want to get into that debate too
Yeah,
much.
it's
Um,
too much. I was
yeah.
because the reason I was watching another person, maybe name also comes to your mind, Robert Breaker or something
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
that. So
Robert
that
Breaker. Yeah,
yeah,
Robert
so
Beaker.
in one of the presentations, he made the argument saying that Alexandria was, like, is not a good place. Antioch is where all the manuscripts was preserved because Christians were first called Christians, and at that point of time, therefore, that's the sort of place that everything was preserved. And then comes Lucian of Antioch. That's where the name Lucian of
Oh, maybe
Antioch actually
could
was
have. He
mentioned.
could have. Yeah. So Robert Beaker, he's a fundamentalist,
Okay.
mid Acts dispensationalist. Now, I would
Right.
consider myself a dispensationalist, but what he does is he applies that to the King James version because Robert Breaker is a King James version onlyist. And so what you're describing there
Mm.
is what I mentioned earlier. It's that two streams theory, right? Antioch
Okay.
good, Alexandrian bad, and so he
Mm.
brings in his theology with the law of first mention. And so where he would go with that is he would say something like, well, Egypt is mentioned in the Bible first, and we've got Moses, and he's delivering his people out of Egypt, and Egypt is keeping God's people in bondage. And so, because that's the first mention of Egypt, Egypt is bad. And so, anything that comes out of
Mm.
Egypt is bad. Whereas Antioch, and like you mentioned, right? Antioch, it's the place where they were
Yes.
first called Christians. And so, law of first mention,
Yes.
Antioch is good. Therefore, everything from Egypt is bad and everything from Antioch is good. Now, I mean, I
Uh,
simplified that, but that gives you the general gist of how that argumentation works
yeah.
and how,
For a moment, it made
yeah,
sense to me.
yeah, sure, sure.
I was almost buying it. But again, I don't mean to, sound liberal in a way that I'm reasoning. What I think the case can be made for how you presenting the case for the Byzantine priority. I
Mhm.
I totally see it because the coherence, the consistency, the preservation, and the stability is very important when it comes to that. But there's also another camp that is actually, the opposing view is that, well, we got to let this text to be transmitted freely. And when we see this from broad perspective, from the wide, not the wider perspective that you are advocating, from the Byzantine
Mhm.
perspective, wider in the sense of critical perspective, is that we're able to see is like what is the close proximity to the period of time. So perhaps that's the principle that is being advocated. Like, okay, if we have many readings, although it is not consistency, we are somehow able to use some kind of principle to say like, okay, this is the closest reading to the time. But I do see how you are saying, in
Mhm.
terms of the Byzantine priority, like that makes sense actually.
Mhm.
Not just personal subjective reasoning, but I would say, for me, the takeaway today in this session is that stability. So
Mhm.
I like that reasoning. Stability is better. I would say
Yeah.
that. And not, so I think generally when we talk about manuscript traditions, people know the two streams, although we're not referring to the
Groups.
the generally known two
Yeah, yeah.
streams, right? They're not. So just back to our conversation earlier when you mentioned the two groups, is that the modern eclecticism, the modern Bible translations, people know that. And obviously in all of, majority of my conversations with people outside of my paradigm or world, from Asia perspective, is that people always come up, it's either KJV, or um like what we call they would call it the Calvinist translations, like LSB, ESV.
Mhm.
So this, they have this, they have already termed this, Calvinist and Armenian translations.
Yeah.
I don't know how that even works. And the argument for KJV is that this TR, I have heard so much information on the internet and on the YouTube. There's so much debate about it. Um, Give us an overview on TR, and what we call the also different editions, and of course, finally, the reasons you would disagree or you see a difference within the Byzantine text type.
Mhm. Yeah, so I want to be clear here. I have tremendous respect for the Textus Receptus.
Hmm.
And again, if you're using the Textus Receptus, you are using something closer to the original than the critical editions. I
Right.
believe that. But the thing about the Textus Receptus is it wasn't there. There was nothing like the Textus Receptus in a single manuscript until the advent of the printing press. And what's really interesting is that those who hold to a Textus Receptus position. So there's one specifically called confessional bibliology, and
Okay.
so if you're reformed, right? And this is typically a reformed approach to bibliology. That's why it's confessional bibliology, because it refers back to the confession that the
Mm.
writings are what is it, authentical in the original Greek and the original Hebrew, and
Okay.
so at that time when those confessions were crafted, they had the Textus Receptus in their hand.
Mm.
And so the argument goes for the confessional bibliologist is that this is the Bible that they're referring to when they wrote chapter 1, paragraph 8, or whatever it is. So yeah, there are some who are confessional, like Presbyterians, confessional Baptists, these kinds of guys who would hold to a position like that.
Mm.
Lutherans even, all right, some of them will hold to the Textus Receptus because Lutherans love tradition.
Mm.
So the Textus Receptus is the traditional text. And what you
Anglicans
got
as
to
well.
understand, yeah, and what you got to understand is I don't just push off the TR guys, because they do have some very interesting arguments, very intriguing arguments, though it's on a different spectrum than where we would come from. So if you look at what happened around the time that the Textus Receptus came about, like what was the big event that happened when the Textus Receptus was printed?
Reformation.
Right, it was the
Ref-
Reformation, right? And the
right.
Reformation was a huge deal. It was absolutely
Mm.
humongous, right? You have power being taken from the Pope, and
Mm.
you have the gospel being clarified, and then
Right.
you have the Word of God, the Bible, being elevated to its rightful place. Right, that's
Hmm.
what happened in the Reformation, generally speaking. Right,
Right. Right.
and so out of the Reformation, out of that revival, if you want to call it that, I'm a Pentecostal minister, so we can call it a revival too, right? Um, Out of that comes the Textus Receptus.
Right.
So an argument could be made on a theological level
Okay.
that God had put this there at that time for that reason, right? And so if it's worked in the past, if it's proven by God, then we continue
Mm.
using it today. And again, I think that's a valid argument. I don't think it goes far enough, because God did not tell us how and when his word would have been, solidified, crystallized for us. But
Mm.
I'm reluctant to say, well, that's a really dumb argument, we shouldn't use it, because people will find that convincing. And that was one
Yeah.
of the things that I struggled with when I was trying to decide between Byzantine or Textus Receptus. And ultimately, for me, there are some readings in the Textus Receptus that just do not work. Like, for example, we talked about the reading in Revelation 22. There's a couple of readings in the book of Acts in which there's
Mm.
very little manuscript support. We
Mm.
have what are what I would call Latin intrusions. So we have Latin readings that have made it into the Textus Receptus. Why? Because
Mm.
Erasmus, right? He had his Latin texts and his Greek texts, and so
Yes.
he pulled all those sources in. Now, what happens when you translate a text? Right? You lose something. Something is always
Mm.
lost in translation, and this is the
Right.
important thing to realize is
Right.
does that mean that, if I'm not reading original Greek, that I'm not getting? No, that's not what I'm saying. But you
Mm.
will lose nuances and things like that when you make a translation. And so
Right.
when you translate into Latin, um, you're losing nuances of the original language. And so
Correct.
I don't see that as a way of perfect preservation.
Right.
So for me,
Because of its
I
sauce. Is that
yeah,
is that is that a better
yeah,
way to describe?
because of its
Yes.
source. Yeah. So for me, the original language should be the vehicle of preservation. And
Mm.
so the Byzantine text, because of its coherence and its massive manuscripts and a number of other reasons, which we haven't touched on today, uh, it just works better. So yeah. So again, I love the TR. Use the TR if you have it. I think the Byzantine text is just a little bit better. Um, but yeah, so now you were asking, I have the question here. You were asking about the different editions.
Right.
So
Is there a yeah, so in my research, it shows that there are different editions, printed editions of TR, and the modern version, like the KJB, that the official one, the authorized version, is based on Blaney 1769 edition, if I'm not mistaken. So talk to us a bit about that, because just a bit of clarification, there is still a bit of dispute among in the same camp of which edition is more authoritative in a sense. Is that
yeah,
is that
so the Blaney 1769 editions, it's actually not a Greek text. It's the King James version. It's just an
oh,
edition. Yeah. So
okay.
what would happen, right, is the first edition was printed in 1611. They print it out,
Okay.
they sell all their copies. They realize there's a few mistakes in there or whatever, right? Because everybody makes mistakes. It's just this is the nature of the work. And
Yes.
so in the second edition, the second printing, they'll fix up some of those mistakes, maybe make a few changes because they found something, and then they'll print that. And then it's like this process of getting better, right?
Refinement.
Refinement, yeah. So that speaks to the King James as an English Bible. But the
Right.
Texas Receptus, right, it went through that same sort of process of refinement. So there's some questions as to which was the first Texas Receptus. We always say Erasmus's editions were the first ones, but the Complutensian Polyglot, which was another printed Greek, right? You got to remember, like, the printing press is brand new. And so everybody
Right.
wants to get their stuff printed, and because you can make more money selling Bibles, right? And you can get it out to the
Right.
churches faster when you're using the printing press as opposed to waiting for scribes to come. And it's just generally more efficient and productive. So everybody wanted to get their Bibles out on the printing press quickly, and
Mm.
so the Complutensian Polyglot began and finished the work and printed the books before Erasmus.
Wow.
But Erasmus was able to get his printed, edited, and finished and published before the Complutensian Polyglot did. Right? A very, very interesting,
It's a race, basically,
historical thing. Yeah, yeah. So some have suggested maybe Erasmus rushed his edition to beat the Complutensian
to be
Polyglot.
the first one. Yeah.
Yeah, to be the first one out with the Greek New Testament. But anyway, so the debate is which one came first, and I think publishing is kind of the big deal. So we would just say Erasmus's came first, and so he produced was it 4 or 5 editions, somewhere around there. So again,
Mm.
he prints it and then he does a little bit more work. He improves it. He improves it. He improves it. And then you come on to a couple others. Now, I forget what the order is. I think it was a Stephanus or Beza.
Mm.
Stephanus produced his editions. Now, in 1551, he produced the really famous one, the famous edition. Right, it was very
Mm.
beautiful. The script was really well done. It became the quote Editio Regia, the royal edition, because it was just so beautiful.
Wow. And that was from Stephanus.
Stephanus, yep. So
Okay.
and Stephanus, right, when he was putting his edition together, he was consulting manuscripts and he was making changes here and there.
So he was doing eclecticism as well.
It's I wouldn't call it wasn't the
Sorry,
same.
sorry. Textual criticism.
He
My
was doing
apologies.
text. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, modern eclecticism is a method of textual criticism.
Right.
So Stephanus was consulting his manuscript pool and making changes based on what he considered to be the more ancient readings. Now, I'm not sure exactly how he made those decisions, but he even left little notes in the margin to say which manuscripts had these readings and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So Stephanus produced, I think, 4 editions.
Wow. Pastor Green, I think we lost you a bit. Your audio. You're muted for some reason.
Hello?
Oh, yes, better now. Yes, we can hear you
There
now.
we go. Does it sound the same as before? Is it not picking
Same,
up
same.
another
It's
one?
the same. I think it
Okay,
was
good.
accidentally muted. Yes.
Yeah, so Stephanus produced a few editions, and then Beza produced Theodore Beza produced a couple editions, and then the Elzevir produced a couple of editions. Now, the Elzevir editions
Oh,
are the ones where we get the name Textus Receptus from because of a Latin
right. They are
phrase
the
in
one,
the
the
preface.
brothers, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So it was this is the text that has been received by all. That was in
Hmm.
his preface, and then that became Textus Receptus. It's Latin. So they wrote their prefaces in Latin. So now,
And they all, sorry for the interruption. And these people, Stephanus, Beza, and Elzevir, they are all basing their work on the printed edition of Erasmus. Is that so? Or they are consulting also manuscript that's available at that point of time?
yeah, so they're essentially based on Erasmus's work with
Right.
some minor tweaks here and there.
Right.
So, I mean,
Somebody said that.
it's still very, very coherent. Oh, Mr. Moreno.
Your,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's right. Somebody's gonna say that
right.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. But yeah, so the Elsevier editions became what had called it the Texas Receptus. That's where we get Texas Receptus from. And then, of course, the
Mm,
King James version came shortly after that. Now, the King James version in English now,
mm.
it was I a revision of the Bishop's Bible is maybe a bit of a strong term, but they used the Bishop's Bible as the base text and made changes to the Bishop's Bible based on a number of other things and using the Texas Receptus. Now, the King James version does not match any of the printed editions exactly of the Texas Receptus. So there are a few
What?
small
Wait,
places
the
here and there.
current modern authorized version does
Yeah,
not match to the
exact.
Rasmus's.
It,
Wow.
it
Okay.
is Texas Receptus. Don't get me wrong.
Yes,
But
but it
none
does
of
not match
those
the text.
editions, it is not
Mm,
exactly a translation of either one of those. So what
mm.
happened? So we get back into the Greek text.
Okay.
Is in the 1800s, after the work of Westcott and Hort was finished, right? They produced the first Greek New Testament that actually overshadowed the Texas Receptus. The Archbishop of Canterbury wanted to produce a modern text of basically Westcott and Hort's work of this new Greek scholarship, and that became known as the Revised Version. So the Revised Version was done in Britain, came over to the U.S. and was called the American Standard Version. You probably heard of those. But in order for the Revised Version to take place, one of the requirements was that every difference between Westcott and Hort's text and the King James Version was to be noted. But because the King James Version does not match exactly any of the printed editions of the TR, that needed to be
Mhm.
remedied. So this is where a guy named Scrivener comes in. So Scrivener comes
Wow.
in, and what he does is he takes the Texas Receptus, and those places where the Texas Receptus did not match with the King James Version, he found those readings amongst the other Texas Receptus editions and kind of put them together. So he had essentially reverse engineered the Texas
He's reconciling
Receptus.
the text.
Yeah, that was quote underlying the King James Version. So I want to be very careful there, and this has been this has been a big fat
No, this is
discussion
very
too.
complicated. I understand
Yeah,
why you want to be careful because it's complicated,
yeah,
complex. It gets even complex because you're dealing with, first of all, different editions, but also you have this revision, and then you have another couple of people, individuals who's coming in, like the scrivener, for example.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. I understand how you want to be, why you want to be careful. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that Scrivener didn't back translate, right? And if you go back in my video backlog, there was a big kerfuffle about reverse engineer and back translate because Scrivener did not go into the text and go, oh, this isn't a TR, I better make up something and put it in. No, he went to other sources, other Texas Receptus editions, and pulled those readings in. So he
Mm,
reverse engineered. He didn't translate. It's a very important distinction, especially to our King James Version only friends or confessional bibliology friends. So anyway, the reason why he had to do that was because now you have the Greek text underlying the King James Version, and you have Westcott and Hort's edition, so they can be compared together, and those differences can now be put in the footnotes of the Revised Version. And then, of course, after the Revised Version made that kind of open the floodgates, and a lot of the modern English translations began coming in after that. But you got to understand that the Texas Receptus and the King James Version were essentially, right? I mean, there were a couple others, right? Yeah, the Geneva Bible, Bishop's Matthews, but the KJV was essentially the standard for about 400 years. Um,
mm,
so so yeah, that there's a little bit of historical stuff on the Texas Receptus tradition. I think it's great, but I think the
mm,
Byzantine's just a little bit better.
mm. I see. Yes, and one of the things that I usually come across in terms of, I think perhaps it's just in relations to how the authorized King James version is actually translated, not necessarily the TR per se. When it
Mhm.
comes to certain verses being translated differently, is that because the translation philosophy of KJB, or is it because of influence or effect influenced by TR?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
There are certain readings or certain verses in KJV that is quite unique. I think, for example, in Jude, the only Lord and the only Master and the only Lord, Jesus Christ.
Okay. Yeah.
and there are certain readings in TR. Is that because of KJV's translation philosophy, or is it affected by TR's manuscript? Sorry, edition readings.
So the example you gave in Titus, to is it the only wise God? Well, let's
No,
find it.
Jude. I think it's Jude.
Jude,
Yeah.
Jude, Jude,
So
Jude.
yes,
I
Jude one.
think the example there is specifically a translational issue as opposed to a
Okay,
textual issue.
not the TR issue,
I
right?
mean,
I just want to get that right.
I can find it. You do have to make a distinction though, because what happens is sometimes you'll have a textual issue which doesn't
Mm,
impact translation at all, right?
right.
Like there are certain words and phrases and things that you can say in Greek different ways that you would
Right.
translate the same. Like you just have to. Like for example, in Greek, different cultures, right? You have different ways of like honoring people, right? I won't even go there. But in Greek, what you do is sometimes when you refer to a person, you use the article in front of their name. So
Mm,
oftentimes in the New Testament, it's not just Jesus said to the Pharisees, it's the Jesus said to the Pharisees, because that's
right.
what they did in Greek is they put the article in front of the name, especially if it was a foreign name, because the way Greek grammar works, you wouldn't know how it functioned in the sentence except the article was there. But so that's totally normal in Greek is to put the word the in front of the name. But in English, if you put the in front of somebody's in front of a proper noun, it just doesn't work out at all. Like I
Yes.
wouldn't be like, hey, I'm going on the Silas's channel. It doesn't work. It's wrong in
Yes.
English. So you don't put the article the in
Mm,
front of a name in English. So whenever there is not always, but for the most time, whenever there is an article in front of a name in Greek, we don't translate that. So if the textual variant is a missing article or an addition of an article, it doesn't matter for us English speakers, and that happens a
okay.
lot. That's one of the main textual variants is that.
Mm, mm.
There's
So, because I just wanted to communicate this idea when I'm talking to other
yeah.
people is that it's translation philosophy rather than textual issue over here when it comes to manuscript edition. I want to present it accurately because my understanding was it because of manuscript edition. But so a better way to see it is actually translation philosophy.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so
And yeah.
a
Go
difference in
ahead. Sorry.
Bible, a difference between Bible versions could be because of translation, or it could be because of a textual issue.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, you have to sort that out.
Correct, correct, exactly. In my opinion, as a layperson, that's another can of worms because there's so much also goes into that.
Hmm.
Now we have addressed manuscript tradition. Now we were talking about translations, like okay,
Yeah,
how should it be
that's right.
translated? What the rules that come in that perspective, right? Um, um, yeah. So and maybe in summary, I'm not sure if you addressed this in terms of the disagreement. I know that you said minor. Is there a textual reason why you would disagree with the? Although I understand we're not amplifying this, right?
Yeah.
We're not taking that. We're not taking that position. But Byzantine priority, Textus Receptus. Could you give us some examples that to see this? What's the minor differences is?
Okay. Yeah. So an interesting minor difference. Well, not so interesting. Like, so for example, in Jude, I think
Okay.
it's in verse 4. I'm just going off the top of my head
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
Paul is writing about Christ Jesus, or he's writing
Okay.
about Jesus Christ. Which is it? Is it Christ
Oh.
Jesus or Jesus Christ? Does that make a difference? Right? Whether you
No.
read that as Christ Jesus or Jesus Christ, it doesn't really make a difference at all. Many of
Okay.
the textual variants are like that, where they really don't impact the sense or the general direction of the passage you're in question.
Mm.
Um, but I think where a lot of people, especially a lot of apologists, typically go a little bit astray here is they'll say things like none of the cardinal doctrines are affected. And it's true, none of the cardinal doctrines are affected, but they'll say there's no major changes, there's nothing in there that impacts doctrine, nothing that impacts this. But that isn't entirely true. It's mostly true but not entirely true.
What
So
what would be the percentage? Like, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
probably
I've
0.1%. Yeah, 0.1% of variance impacts
I do see
issues.
that emphasis at times. I do see
Yeah,
the extreme of both sides, right?
yeah.
What we say is like, no, cardinal doctrines are, I've interacted with some brothers. I mean, I regard them as brothers, but when it comes to this kind of discussion on this spectrum, it's like, no, they flatly say that, it's affecting cardinal doctrines. It's diminishing the deity of Christ.
Hmm.
At this point, you denying the Orthodox faith. um, but the other side is like, no, they try to be apologetic, they try to be reconcilable,
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
things. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a distinction between apologetics and then detailed discussion of textual
Oh
variants.
yes, yes,
So
yes.
yeah, it's an
I totally agree.
interesting, yeah, an
You
interesting
want to be
line
honest
to
to the
weave.
facts as well.
Yeah. So I touched on this one earlier. You have First Timothy. Is it First Timothy or Second Timothy? Again, I don't remember that 3:16,
Yeah.
right? That great is the mystery of godliness. He who is manifest versus God who is manifest. So if you have he who is manifest, again, that's critical text reading, but
Mm,
not all critical scholars think that that's the right reading. But with that being said, that reading, he who is manifest in the flesh, is not really a Trinitarian a Trinitarian doctrine, right? Now, again, I'm a Pentecostal. Everybody wants to know that if I'm Trinitarian. Of course, I'm Trinitarian. I know there's oneness Pentecostals. I'm not one of those. I believe the Trinity. Okay,
yeah.
so yeah, so he who is manifest in the flesh is not an explicit reference to the doctrine of Christ's divinity. But God who is manifest in the flesh, right? Because God, flesh being connected. Wait, what's that? Well, that's the incarnation, right?
Mm-mm.
So God was manifest in the flesh is the explicit reference to the divinity of who Jesus is.
Mm.
So yeah, it's an important variant. Now, does that mean that if you go he who is manifest in the flesh, that all of a sudden the Bible doesn't really go towards Jesus' divinity? Well, of course not, because you've got John 1, which is practically uncontested in the manuscript tradition. What's that? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting the funny translation issue there if you're Jehovah Witness, but um, but you have the divinity of Christ in Philippians 2, for example, uncontested. So the divinity of Jesus is not on trial here because the modern critical editions have he who is manifested versus God who. Now, as a Byzantine prioritist, God who is
Mm.
manifest in the flesh is definitely original from our perspective.
Right.
So I would still argue for that, and I
Mm.
think it's important. But I'm not willing to castigate my critical text brothers over that. Um,
Mm.
I mean, we're going to have some discussions, and it's going to be good. It's going to be fun. But now there is one textual variant, however, which I have been able to find, which does impact Christian practice. And so, if you go to Mark 9:29, it
Okay.
talks about prayer and fasting. So you recall that the disciples came to Jesus and they said to him,
Right.
we tried to cast this demon out of this guy and it wouldn't go anywhere. Of course, I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
And so Jesus looks at them and he says, well, that's because this kind doesn't go out except through prayer and fasting. So
Mm.
in 9:29, you got the King James version, wonderful.
Yes.
Why don't you pull the New King James version up there,
Okay.
because the New King James version will have the note.
Let me do this. New. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the passage there, Mark 9:21. So he said to them, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. You see that
Mm-hmm.
there's a note there, the
Yes.
little a, and underneath it has it omits and fasting. So the word and
Right.
fasting is not in our modern critical editions.
Yes.
It's in the Byzantine text, it's in the Textus Receptus, but it's not in the modern critical editions. So
Mm.
there is the equivalent passage in Mark 17. Is it Mark 7 or Matthew 17? Is it Matthew 17? Which was it? This is one of the big ones. Matthew. I'll just do a quick search just to make sure we get it right here. Prayer and fasting. Matthew 17:21. So in
Okay.
Matthew
Matthew.
17:21, oh, perfect. So in Matthew 17:21, take a look at the
Mm,
footnote there, right? So Matthew 17:21 is completely omitted. The whole verse
mm.
is completely omitted from the modern critical edition. Some even don't even have the verse number there.
Footnote.
Um,
Okay,
so
the worst number. Yeah.
so you're looking at this and you're like, okay, however, this kind does not go except by prayer and fasting. And you go, okay, well, I mean, the Bible tells us about fasting in other places. Absolutely, the Bible tells us about prayer in other places. But
Hmm.
these two references, Mark 19 9:29 and Matthew 17:21, these are the only two places that connects prayer and fasting to demon what do you call it, to exorcism, essentially,
Right.
to casting out demons. Now, again, I'm a Pentecostal minister, and when we're casting out demons, I want every advantage that I can get to do so. And
Right.
in these two passages, in Matthew 17:21 and Mark 19 9:29,
Mm,
it's a clear statement of fact that fasting brings an advantage to casting out
mm,
demons. Now,
right.
there's lots of questions as to why these are removed, right? We can make sense of why they're removed. What we can't make sense is why they're added. There's been some things suggested that, fasting was a big thing in the early church. And so it was imposed on the text by people here because they wanted to. But the issue is you don't really see that kind of imposition on the text. There's a really good example of a place where it could be imposed, but it's not. And so in this, like in the Sermon on the Mount, for example, when Jesus is saying that you should bless those who persecute you and pray for
Mm,
those who deride you, right?
okay.
If you go into some of the early Christian writings on this, like the Didache, which is a first century document written that just kind of spells out, nobody knows who wrote it, but it was a really influential document in the early church. And they actually
Mm,
quote Jesus saying here, but in the Didache, they say prayer and fasting. So,
right.
so what that means is that if there was this penchant for the church to push into the scripture things which they were doing in the early church, then the Sermon on the Mount would be a prime example of a place where that should occur, but it doesn't.
Mm,
So
right.
what that
Right.
means, right, generally speaking, is that these sorts of things are not being imported into the text. And so that excuse, that reason for its omission or that reason for its addition just
Okay.
doesn't stand up to criticism. So anyway,
The
how this
appeal is. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Finish your thought.
yeah,
Sorry.
so how this impacts doctrine, right, is for me personally, I remember when I read this,
Mm,
not knowing any better, right? When I read this, it just clicked in that there's a connection between prayer and fasting and demonic
right.
deliverance.
Right.
And
Right.
for me, the scripture actually made that connection in my head for me, like it spoke to me.
Mm,
I would not have made that connection as soon as I did, except the scripture had said that. So
right.
so there is definitely an impact there. Now, again, is this heresy, and does this all of a sudden mean that your modern critical edition is not a Bible and it's not good and you should throw it in the trash and burn it? No, it's just one of those things you should be aware of, right?
Yeah.
So
That's because, yeah, if Jesus is saying, I think sometimes from my perspective is that, what did Jesus say? So I think that should be the motivation for us to get into that particular tradition that we are trying to pursue and really discover. And if there is, I do see in some of the footnotes saying that early manuscripts omit this, but then some do not have those verses as you mentioned. Um, and I think if it is can be evident and proven even with extra biblical sources, then I think we have a very good case that should be the particular reading that is found in the manuscripts, such as in the Byzantine priority.
yeah,
So yeah, I see the arguments definitely for that. If you don't mind, this Kelvin here is saying that, show Pastor Green, obviously Romans 8:1.
mhm.
What's the issue here?
Yeah.
There is no now. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So Romans 8:1, it's the second part of the verse there. That there's therefore no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh but after the Spirit.
This one. Right.
Right? So who walk not after the flesh but after the Spirit is not in verse 1. So the first thing I'll say to this is that it's not as big of an issue as it seems on the surface, because what happens is if you read down to verse 4,
Mm,
you have the entire paragraph summed up with who walk not after the flesh, but after the spirit. So
mm,
this is really only a problem for those who like to take a single verse and run with it. Right? You should, as a general practice, when you're reading the Bible, you should take everything in context and stuff. When we take it in context, you see it in verse 4. But with that being said, um, there is an interesting nuance here when you have it in both verse 1 and verse 4. Right.
mm,
So you got it in verse 4 that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us who walk not after the flesh, but after the spirit. But the nuance here is when it's repeated like that, right? You can sense, right, the importance with which Paul is stating this. He's basically saying, and he does this, Paul does this in Romans. Now I'm giving you an internal, I don't really like internal arguments. Externally, the Byzantine reading has the whole verse in verse 1, right? That's what I would roll with. I would say they're both. If the one in verse 4 is there, I mean, it still works out, but there's a force, there's a nuance there of Paul really hammering this point home that you can't
mm,
just be a Christian and walk in no condemnation while you're still living in the flesh. And he's hammering that
mm,
home. He says that in verse 1 and verse 4. And he does this all throughout. He clarifies himself and he really exemplifies these important points. Like, shall I sin that grace may abound? God forbid. And he
mhm.
repeats that in different ways, but he repeats that later on in the book of Romans, right? So, yeah, totally aware. It's the Byzantine reading. It's not in the modern critical editions, typically because you're not going to see it in Codex Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Those are those two we looked at earlier. But the vast majority of our manuscripts have that passage, the whole passage.
So the approach would be is that it is normal. Usually, I think when I even came against with this example, um, it it took a bit of time to basically to understand. Someone actually explained to me, but in other reading, obviously, I was reading from the critical text
Mhm.
Bibles, the modern Bibles. It made immediate sense. So how you are approaching is basically is through hermeneutical principles.
Mhm.
So the other example with the mark is that is because directly, I mean, it touches the essence of that text itself. Here, it's about interpretive principle.
Mhm.
Is that a way to see it?
Well, the
Because
so
both the argument from the other side is that, well, this says that if you in I understand you have to read everything in context, but people, sometimes they will just gloss over and say, like,
that's right.
look
That's
here,
right.
it says that you gotta walk, you gotta work, and then only there's no condemnation, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I see in both ways. I'm trying to find that nuance, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
between the example in Mark and the example in Romans 8. I And this also goes to the hard reading and the easy reading as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
uh,
So yeah, this example in Romans 8:1, I would not consider this a textual variant that makes a huge impact, right?
okay.
Again, because what happens is in verse 4, you have the statement there encapsulating all of verses 1 to verse 4, right?
Mm,
Well, now what I
okay.
am saying is that there is a nuance there.
Mm,
There is a very interesting nuance to follow along with. But it's not game breaking. It doesn't break
mm.
your Bible. It doesn't make it all of a sudden, this heretical book that you should go and throw in the garbage. Your faith
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
hang. Your faith doesn't hang on that,
Right,
or at least
exactly.
it shouldn't. Um,
Yes,
so so yeah.
I get that. I get that.
So yeah,
Yes,
but
totally.
the example of Mark 9:29 and Matthew 17:21, I would take that as a more important variant. Now again, does it
Mm,
break the faith? No, it doesn't break the faith because it touches on a tiny
it's
little
important. Yeah.
subset of things you do as a Christian. It impacts practice a little bit. But you could make the case and argue for its inclusion. So I think prayer and fasting should be
Mm.
included. And again, there's lots of debate about that one specifically.
Mm.
Not the Matthew 17:21. I think
It's
modern,
the Mark ending.
yeah, the
The
Mark 9:29 portion,
right.
the end fasting portion there. There's some debate there now. So the
Mm,
Tyndale House Greek New Testament, which is another one produced with different methods, right? They actually included that one. Yeah.
right. There's another one also where I think perhaps it will do this in closing with the example where he mentioned in Mark that baptized. Is there a variant reading on that? He who is he who believes and baptized is
Okay,
not
yeah.
condemned.
So that's Acts 8:37,
Right.
and so this is the confession of the Ethiopian eunuch. So we can go there. Why don't you pop it up? And
Okay.
the portion in question, right? Pop it up in the New King James Version. Is the
Okay. Let
actual
me do that.
confession of the eunuch when he says that I believe that you are the Son of God. Um, yeah, you have to pull that up.
Yeah, 837. I'm doing that. Okay, let me.
No, this one is a tricky variant
Okay.
because the omission of the verse is
Sorry for the. Right. This is from the
yeah.
KJV.
Yeah, pull it up in the New King James Version because they'll have the note there.
Okay. My
Yeah.
apologies.
Yeah,
Let
no
me
worries.
do. Oh, no.
Sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear my kids in the background. I just heard some
No, no, we can't
screaming.
hear anything. That's
Okay, good, good.
probably perfect. Yes. Okay, I see it here. 837. Then Philip said, if you believe with all your heart, you may. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. The footnote says 837. Verse
Yep.
37 is found in the Western text, including the Latin tradition.
So the NU text is the Modern Critical Edition. It stands for Nestle Aland or UBS. Okay, this is the
Okay.
United Bible Society, the UBS text, and
Okay.
the majority text refers to the majority, the Hodges Farstad majority text specifically, but generally speaking, it's going to be the majority reading. Oh, the majority of manuscripts actually omit the verse. And so what you have is a split where about 20% of our Byzantine manuscripts contain the verse, and about 80% of the manuscripts do not contain the verse.
Mm,
Now, this is not found in the Robinson Pierpont text. I don't have it
mm,
down here with me, and it's relegated to the footnotes. So this is one of the very few places where the Byzantine text differs from the Textus Receptus. And some
mm,
have suggested that this verse actually came over from the Latin tradition. And as you see here in the footnote, it says it is found in the Western text. So that's Latin. So some have suggested this is possibly a place. Now, where it gets tricky, okay,
mm.
is Irenaeus quotes this passage in the second
Interesting.
century. In the second century, so this is why it's
Wow.
difficult because we can say the Byzantine text doesn't have it, but the reality is the Byzantine text does have it in 20% of its manuscripts. So, so
So
what
the
do
one that has
yeah,
it is 20%, that doesn't have is 80%.
yeah.
And
So
now you're
typically,
divided whether to go or to not to go with it.
right, and this verse specifically is
Right.
probably for me the trickiest textual question because
But here
because of
it's included.
Irenaeus. Yeah, well,
Here it's
this is the
included
New
on the
King
basis
James
of
version.
Irenaeus.
Yeah, because it's
Good.
in the
Good.
Textus Receptus. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you can see where if this is a Latin reading, that this would be another Latin intrusion into the Textus Receptus, which happens from time to time. But again, in the second century, you've got Irenaeus quoting this verse.
So that makes
So
a solid case, for this addition of this verse.
possibly,
Yeah.
because then the question is, how do you explain its omission
So Pastor Green,
from
may I clarify? NKJV follows the Byzantine type text.
So the NKJV follows the Textus Receptus, but
Oh,
it has the footnotes that point you to the majority text, which is
okay.
essentially the Byzantine text.
Okay, got it. Yeah, people, I really appreciate the way that you're approaching this from the educational perspective and interacting with the church history. Because sometimes when you say that, okay, someone is quoting, and then you quote this very strange name in the first 300 years, it's like, who is this
Yeah,
people? Like, why are
yeah,
you
yeah,
quoting even this guy?
yeah.
Like, there's even a big pushback was like, okay, why are we supposed to do this? Like, they will take like as if the Bible was like dropped out of heaven. And this is another challenge to, that's a
Mhm.
different subject to
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about. Yeah. But anyway, I really appreciate what you have, stayed with us and addressed all this. But in closing, we have talked. we have covered, I would say, in short span of time, a lot of things.
A lot.
Really appreciate that. How much of all this, right, impacts the reading of Bible today, in terms
Um,
of its translations, generally? How much of it? I mean, if there is anything major, you can obviously share with us. If Share your thoughts on that.
yeah. So the prayer and fasting thing is probably the most important variant in my mind, between
Mm,
the modern critical method and the Byzantine text. Because, like I said, for me personally, it just didn't clue in until I read that. That,
mm,
prayer and fasting, and that there is this sort of advantage that's had when you're in a fasted state.
right.
So, and that is probably the most important textual variant. There are others, but what happens with those variants is there are other places in the New Testament that back up the supposed, decline in Jesus' deity. It just doesn't work out, right? So if one verse over here has a textual variant which seems to pull Jesus' divinity down, the other
Mm,
verses in the New Testament still have a high Christology.
yes.
Those, I mean, it's not nothing. We should, do one of these over it. I mean, not punching each other and stuff, but we
Yeah.
should be wrestling with these things. Um, but when it comes to the overall telos, right? The telos of scripture. That was a phrase I learned a little while ago. Telos is Greek for end or maturity, right? But
Okay.
the general purpose of scripture is not impacted by many, but 99.9% of the textual variation between our editions. So if you have a New American Standard Bible and that's what you grew up reading, read it. If it's sitting on your shelf and you're not reading it, it's not doing any good for you at
Gotta
all.
get
Like
it in
it's right.
KJV.
I mean, ANKJV is the best in my opinion. But if you're
Right.
reading a Christian Standard Bible, you'll be fine, right? Like
Yeah.
you're not gonna like burn in hellfire because you're using a CSB, and you're not going to be led to Buddha because you're reading an ESV. Um, there's you're going to have a
Mm,
few small doctrinal issues
mm,
between some of the translations, and most of that will come from translation as opposed to textual things. Um,
right.
so, so yeah, I mean, if you're reading your Bible prayerfully and you're studying the issues, you will be fine. There's no
Yes.
reason to be scared of it. Um,
I I
but
I, I really see that. I agree with you totally, because um I transitioned into Reformed tradition, and my first Bible was NIV, and then as usual, and
the
because it was
ESV,
clear, and then moved to ESV, then LSB. One thing I was actually wanted to ask of you
sure,
is that I found that in LSB it has Byzantine readings as well
in the
for some
footnotes,
reason. No, in the text.
really
Um,
interesting.
yeah, one
Show
of the
show me some.
verse.
I'd love to hear.
Um, Let me see. Is it okay? So this one, this does not Matthew 17:21-23.
Yep,
Okay, let me share with you, right? So I wanted to know, understand what's the translation for, again, the philosophy, behind that material. So
oh,
they
okay, okay, that's what's going on there. I see it right away. So
Right.
it's encapsulated in square brackets.
Yeah. Right.
So
So
when
they
it's
do
in,
say
yeah,
it
when
omits it, but they
when you
say
see
here.
something in square brackets like that, the NASB
Mm,
does this too, the
mm-hmm,
1995 edition specifically. When you
mm.
see square brackets around a phrase, that's the editor saying we don't believe this is original.
Oh,
So they're leaving it in the text, but they're giving you an indication that they don't think it's original.
but they
So
give a verse, number of verses for that as well.
yeah, yeah, it's not.
Mm.
This isn't the only place. You'll probably see something like that around Mark 16, 9 through 20. You'll see that
Right.
probably in Acts 8:37. You'll see that in Matthew 17:21,
Yeah, I want
Mark
to see
9:29.
Revelation 22:14 as well. The tree of life.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So the tree of life is traditional reading, like is that Byzantine?
yep. Yep, that's
Okay.
critical text Byzantine. Yeah, it's their tree of life. Tree of life is not really a critical or Byzantine. It's just that's what the Greek text says, generally
Okay, that's what
speaking.
the
Like
generally speaking.
there's general agreement there.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Is there any particular verse that, like, just before we wrap up, you wanted to see legacy in the legacy that might have possibly? I'm just saying. I don't know. So I pretty much right now I read LSB.
Try Second
Um,
Timothy 3:16. Let's see what they did
is it
there.
God manifest in the flesh? Right.
Yeah,
That would be First
First Timothy.
Timothy.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it is. No, it's, Pastor. Yeah. So he
Oh,
uses
so
he.
he.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
see
See the footnotes.
this is the issue here. Now this is a whole frustration of mine. There
Okay.
should be a footnote there, but there's not.
Right.
There should be a footnote there.
There should be a
I mean, they
footnote.
have footnotes everywhere else, but there should be a footnote there. It's interesting, like because what I'll do is a lot of my videos I'll go through specific variants and we'll deep dive into that one variant. And it is
Mm,
surprising how many times there's no footnote in specific translations when there really should be. So this
mm,
one really should have a footnote there. That's interesting.
right. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yes, totally. Yeah, I just wanted to check. I think the reason I picked LSB is because, again, perhaps it's the translation philosophy is also how the Old
Hmm.
Testament Tetragrammaton is also translated there.
Yeah.
I don't know, for some reason it gives almost close to literal reading. It's difficult, I get that, but it's not that too archaic in a sense. It generally communicates in a modern sense, but
Hmm.
it's not that easy as NIV is. That in terms of the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
philosophy behind it is word literal, word
More
for word.
literal. Yeah.
Although would you say there's no, okay, so this will be the golden question of the final one, right?
All right. The golden
I
question.
I know you have said NKJV. You also say Christian Standard Bible. So in our congregation, Reformed Baptists, of course, I think the pastors use different texts. I mean, different translation. I'm assuming, but for the people, they use the Christian Standard Bible. When I read it, it's like it's more easy to read,
Hmm.
kind of a So besides NKJV, what are the translations that you would recommend in terms of from the Byzantine priority? Is there any other?
Okay. Um, So the majority standard Bible is Byzantine New Testament, and it's relatively new. So this is Bible
Mm,
Hub. They had done some work on producing the Berean Standard Bible. You probably heard of it. Used to be
hmm.
called the Berean Study Bible, but everybody got
Wow.
confused and thought that there would be footnotes like a commentary in there, but it
Right.
wasn't. So they changed it to the Berean Standard Bible. Anyway, so they began work on producing a majority text translation, and so they have the majority standard Bible, so you can get that. And
Majority
then,
Standard Bible. Okay.
yep, my friend Adam Boyd has done some work, a translation on the English critical Greek New Testament, and he
Mm,
uses the word critical in there, but not in the same sense.
right, right.
Because what his English translation of the Byzantine text does is it
Hmm.
gives you in English the differences between the Byzantine and the critical editions and the other editions. So in the Texas Receptus. So it's a very interesting resource. And I was actually just reading some of it yesterday, and it's a decent translation.
Mm,
Now, if you don't want to do that and you love your critical text Bibles, I
right,
think your New American Standard 95 is probably the better option. And the
right.
reason why I say that is because typically what they'll do is they will include the Byzantine readings in the text with those square brackets. And I just say ignore the square brackets and you've got a good, you got a good
Mm,
Byzantine-ish text. I mean, it's not perfect, but yeah. But again, I just the New King James Version for me because it's committee-based translation. A lot of people had worked on it. It's been around for a while. It's a stable text. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why the New King James Version is preferred over even some of the other Byzantine editions. And those
mm,
majority footnotes is what makes it the cream of the crop, in my opinion.
right, right. And somebody is asking, if you allow for one question, what's your take on LSB?
I don't know. I haven't really used it. I'll be honest, right? I'll be honest. When I
It's all modern.
saw,
So you will fall under the category of modern Bible. So that's the general assumption.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So when I first heard that there was a new Bible translation coming out and John MacArthur was kind of heading it,
Right.
the first thought in my head is like, why do we need another one? Because there's just so
I
many
get that.
English Bible translations, right?
I get that. I get that.
So yeah, so my initial thought was, why do we need another? And again, I know people who swear by it and think it's the greatest thing ever. It's a critical
Mm,
edition, right? It's going to have some of the passages omitted that I think shouldn't be, and a number of other issues like that. But
mm.
I'm guessing that you wouldn't go wrong using it, but
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
I can really only just leave it out there because I just don't use it. So
Right, right. I understand. I understand.
yeah.
And there is, I think, there's one New Testament that's coming. The parallel KJV New Testament.
Oh yeah, Mark
Uh,
Ward's doing that. Yeah,
right, right. So I ordered it. I just have to say it. I think that's a
that's funny.
great thing. And you are doing something as well. I was gathering from from the comments
Yeah.
or something.
So the project is on hold right now just because there was a little bit of confusion and stuff. So this is the Byzantine text form. So it's the Greek New Testament based on the Byzantine text, and it's the updated 2026 edition.
Okay.
So one of the things that we did with ours is, again, this is in Greek. So if you don't speak Greek, it probably isn't going to be
Okay.
very helpful for you.
Okay.
But what we did is we compared the Byzantine text against all of the major printed editions of the Greek New Testament today. So the
Mm,
Nestle Aland text, the Tyndale House Greek New Testament, the SBL Greek New
massive
Testament,
work.
the Textus Receptus, Scrivener's Textus Receptus, and Stephanus's Textus Receptus. We did 11 editions in the ECM, the new one, and we
Mm,
showed every single difference. With a few caveats, right? There's some orthographic stuff that really doesn't matter, so we didn't do that. But there's the bottom portion. So you have the text, the main text of the Greek text on top, and then underneath that is a separate area where we list all of the differences between all of the major editions. And for the most part, like, they almost don't matter. So like it's
wow.
interesting. I mean, some of them do, don't get me wrong, but most of them are just kind of like,
Right.
whatever. But
Yes,
yeah, so
yes.
it's on hold because we had that conference back at Clearview Press, or sorry, Clearview Church in North Carolina. It was a Byzantine
Mm,
text conference, really good. It was awesome. But they had a surprise that they were releasing their own. Of course, it's Dr. Robinson there, so
right.
we want them to finish theirs first, so that we can ensure
Okay.
that the body of our text matches with their edition. So it's we just have to wait. Unfortunately, that's
Right.
just the way it
Right.
is. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a lot of work there. And I guess, I don't read Greek,
yeah,
but I'm sure there's obviously usefulness and for that work,
yeah,
definitely, right?
yeah.
And yes. So Pastor Green, we have, had this conversation for 2 hour plus already.
That's right.
Thank you so much. And despite, your time over there, I really appreciate your grace, for accepting the invitation and sharing all this information. Your YouTube channel is actually linked in the description
Oh,
as well.
awesome.
Yeah, and for people to go and share the information. I mean, get more information on the things that you do. Particularly, the thing is that because you have this subject focus that is the New Testament
Hmm.
textual criticism, and you have this long form and short form videos as well.
Hmm.
I urge I recommend the audience to, if you're interested in a particular subject, to go and visit, and of course all the conversations and interviews with the scholars. That's important as well.
Hmm.
So that gives you a different perspective, and so really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time today.
All right. Thanks a lot, Silas.
Take care. God bless you, Pastor.
All right. Bye.
Bye. And everyone, God bless you. Thank you so much for staying with us. Take care and have a nice weekend. God bless you.